Hey, welcome back. Today I'm going to read chapter 3, verses 1 through 7 of Genesis. Just to give you an account of what has happened so far. Uh, God has planted the Garden of Eden. He's created man, and Adam, the first man, named all the wild animals, and from his rib, God created Eve, and he chose her as his helpmeet, or his helper, uh, and they got married, and they were naked, and they felt no shame. So we'll see how they get their shame, and how they're expelled from the Garden of Eden in chapter 3. All right, chapter 3, verse 1, expulsion from Eden. Now the snake was the most cunning of all the wild animals that the Lord God had made. He asked the woman, "Did God really say, 'You shall not eat from any of the trees in the garden?'" The woman answered the snake, "We may eat of the fruits of the trees in the garden. It is only about the fruits of the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, 'You shall not eat it or even touch it, or else you will die.'" But the snake said to the woman, "You certainly will not die. God knows well that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like gods, who know good and evil." The woman saw that the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eyes, and the tree was desirable for gaining wisdom. So she took some of its fruit and ate it. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. Alright, so obviously there's a lot to say about that passage, but I'm not sure if I can get super into it now since my thoughts on it aren't very clear. So I'll just give you, after I read the footnotes, I'll give you sort of my impressions of it rather than my meditations upon it, I suppose, because they're confused for sure. All right, so here's the footnote for chapter 3, verse 1, and it's of the word cunning. There is a play on the words for naked and cunning or wise. The couple seek to be wise but end up knowing that they are naked. Alright, here's the next footnote for 3:5. Like gods who know, or like God who knows. I suppose there's sort of a polytheistic aspect going on there. So yeah, it is strange that you would see polytheism in the Bible, but this is a very early story, so it's understandable that the traces of it are still there. And that's it. Those are the two footnotes for that passage. Now, even in the first verse, in the first sentence of it, there's stuff to say. I mean, the snake was the most cunning of all the wild animals. It's a strange adjective to use for the snake. One would assume it's evil, right? I mean, Milton thought that he was Satan, and I think in the New Testament it's asserted that this serpent is in fact Satan, but they use the word cunning rather than evil or malevolent or what's the word I'm thinking of? I don't know, but you catch my drift. And they don't use that. They use cunning, and usually when I think of cunning, I think of it in a more positive aspect. When if I'm sort of like being clever, right? And being clever isn't bad. Sometimes well, it's generally a desirable trait to be clever, to be of a sharp wit, to be intelligent, because that's sort of what the Bible implies the serpent is. It's intelligent, quick-witted, cunning, and it's not associated with good actions. It's associated with temptation of all things. So it's a strange association there. I'm not sure what to make of it. Even the other day, I had a conversation with one of my friends, and we were discussing some people that we knew who had passed away, and he said, my friend, he said that it was a shame that one of them passed away because he was so intelligent, right? That he could have contributed much to the world. And I said, well, intelligence doesn't amount to much if you're not a good person. And he said, yeah, that's true. So, I mean, not to say that the guy who passed away wasn't a good person, but he was one of those people who would make fun of you and tease you in not so friendly a manner, but I don't wish to desecrate the dead, so I'll leave it at that. But beyond that, in a more abstract and general thought, what is more important in life? Would you rather be cunning and transgress your morality in order to accomplish something witty and intelligent and cunning? Or would you rather be more base, not base, but duller? Would you rather be more dull and yet stick to what you know to be virtuous? Would you rather be more simple yet more good? It's a strange question. But that's sort of the association that this verse brings to us. And of course, he says he's just trying to hoodwink these guys, the humans. He's trying to me it seems like he's trying to fool with them. And he's trying to make them fools. In perhaps a malevolent way, but still, nonetheless, he's taking them for fools. He says, did God really say you shall not eat from any of the trees in the garden? And mind you, Eve never heard God say that, for God did not make Eve before before he declared that. So she never heard him actually say those words, but she had been told by Adam that was the case, and it's evident in her response, because she says, you shall not eat of it or even touch it, or you shall die. And God never said don't touch it. He said don't eat of it. So I assume that Adam, when he talked to Eve, he said, don't even touch it. Don't even think of touching it, He was trying to ensure that she wouldn't even come near it, let alone eat of it. And I had read that observation probably a year ago in a commentary on this verse. I don't remember which one, but I remember reading that. And it was insightful, because of course the serpent is going to attack the weakest link, right? Because he is subtle. He's going to attack the person who is more vulnerable, for Eve had not heard in person God say that. And so her faith in those words, even though it was related to her by Adam, it is probably on a less firm foundation than Adam's own perception of it. Even though Adam also decided to eat of the tree, but it was Eve who did it first. And the snake said, "You certainly will not die. God knows well that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like gods, who know good and evil." Well, that's a lie sprinkled with truth, because later on, God does in fact complain that, where is it? He complains, "See, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil." So the snake is telling the truth in that aspect, but what he's lying about, or rather it's a half-truth, because the other half of that statement says, "You certainly will not die." And that's false. They do die. It's delayed. They don't die immediately, but they do die because of their actions. And that's how lies tend to be. The most effective lies are those sprinkled with truth. And, well, the snake is cunning. He knows that. In fact, I also read that in a very similar commentary. I think most of my own interpretation of these few passages comes from those commentaries that I read about 1.5 or 2 years ago. But I don't know. I don't remember who they were or what books they were from, so I won't be able to give them credit. But I know that it was of an old commentary. And the woman saw that the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eyes, and the tree was desirable for gaining wisdom. I mean, this is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This is at the center of the garden. This is one of God's pride, right? This is something that he withholds from humanity, because, at least in my eyes, this tree is not for humanity. It was for God and heavenly host, right? Because this is God's pleasure park. It's not paradise for humans. Humans, their job was to tend the park. This is a pleasure park for God, or at least that's what it says in one of these previous footnotes. And yeah, so of course it's going to be desirable, and that temptation gets to Eve. It gets to her. And it also gets to Adam soon after. Yeah, something that is always in your presence, and yet you're forbidden to investigate it. You feel compelled to investigate it more and more. It's sort of a psychological anachronism or something, inconsistency. Well, not inconsistency, but you're told not to do something, yet you do it anyway, just because you've been told not to do it. It's something that children do all the time, and I mean, even now, and when Adam and Eve had no shame, they basically were children. They were what mature adults would be had they not lost their innocence, right? So I'm not going to say adult children, because they're not. I don't know how to explain it. Certain aspects of them are very probably naive, right? As children's are, and as young people's are. But that doesn't mean that they don't have the capability of rationality, right, as adults do, because they are adults, and yet because of their inexperience of the world, they lack wisdom, and so perhaps that's why they felt tempted by this tree. Perhaps it's because it promised wisdom. yeah, and it says here, then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. So they found something. They found the tree did something to them, the fruit. And in another uh, in another of those old commentaries I read, it also remarked that they Adam and Eve weren't their eyes weren't opened from any intrinsic power of the fruit itself, but rather they were opened because they transgressed against the law of God, and because they knew, and because they committed an action against God. That's what caused their eyes to be open, and for their realization of shame, of guilt, of sin. It was the act of sinning against God that produced such a remarkable change in them, not any intrinsic power of the fruit itself. So it's something to consider. It's an interesting proposition, because you may see something that tempts you, right? But it's just the act of giving into temptation rather than the intrinsic power of whatever object is tempting you that is sinful, right? It's like if you snort a bunch of cocaine. If you snort a bunch of cocaine, you get, well, I assume you get unbelievably excited and pleased, and it's tempting to do it, and because it's a temptation, you recognize it as a sin. Perhaps the very nature of temptation implies sin, but a state of such bliss and euphoria isn't necessarily sinful. It's just the fact that it was accomplished through a temptuous, or through temptation itself. That's what's sinful. It's not the actually feeling that it incurs, but the just the implied temptation within the accomplishment of that action. That's what's sinful. So they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. Alright, I think that's it for that video. Thanks for listening. I'll see you guys next time.